I'm right. Still back in the hotel, but I do want to keep making these good tutoring reviews for you guys. So, we are continuing with our New England colonies with the dissension in the Bay Colony. In the Puritan worldview, everything worked according to a plan set by God and an orderly society of people who worked and lived out that plan. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was a tight-knit group founded on the ideals of being a harmonious community of people who agreed to work together and abide by the wishes of the larger community. Puritan theology gave weight to the idea that if people allowed God's will to rule and guide the community, peace, harmony, and prosperity would follow. If the community did not live up to that ideal, however, God's wrath would come down and destroy the community. The Puritan elders, therefore, felt obligated to make sure that people conformed to the ideals of the community. To not conform suggested that a person was an impostor who was not predestined to be saved and did not really belong to the community. As with any group, there were differences of opinion, but the leaders of the colony made sure that such differences did not stray too far from established ideals. Harmony and faith, not tolerance, were the guiding principles. When forced to choose between the harmony of the colony and banishing or executing the dissenters, Governor Winthrop and the ministers did not hesitate to act against nonconformists to preserve what they felt were the best interests of the larger communities. One dissenter, Roger Williams, was a highly educated man who held a strong belief in an individual's freedom of worship. He arrived in Massachusetts in 1631 after a short stay in Plymouth. Even by Plymouth standards, Williams was a radical separatist who came to be known as the purest of Puritans. He was troubled by the idea that the Puritans had not made a clean break from the corrupt Church of England. So basically what we see here, I'm sorry guys, what we see here is this cult-like atmosphere, right? Cult-like atmosphere, you have to follow the rules or you will be banished or sent to death, right? Roger Williams came on the scene and was troubled when he saw the fact that this group did not get a clean break from the Church of England. He thought that was kinda weird. He thought that was kind of a weird stance for the Puritans. Williams was elected minister of a church in Salem in 1635, where he found a forum for advocating his ideas. One of his most extreme ideas was that the English should respect the land rights of the Native Americans, and that it was a sin to take possessions of any land without first buying it from the Indians. The notion was in direct conflict with the Bay's colony charter and the general opinion of many English men. So he wanted to respect these Native Americans and offered them money in exchange for their land. But many Englishmen, did not support this idea. Another idea that Williams held was that religious groups should be supported by voluntary tithes, not taxes as demanded by the Bay Colony leaders. When Williams went on to claim that magistrates should have no voice in spiritual matters, he went too far. He wanted a complete separation of church and state, asserting that forced religion stinks in God's nostrils. His views proved to be too extreme for the radical Church of Salem, which finally removed him. The Bay Colony General Court found Williams guilty of disseminating dangerous opinions and banished him from the colony. So he believed in the separation of church and state. This created the government principle of separation between church and state we find in our Constitution and our rules. We separate church and state. Fleeing the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1636, Williams headed southwest, where he settled at Narragansett Bay and established a Baptist church. He acquired land from the Indian chiefs and named his settlement Providence, in thanks to God. In 1644, William secured a charter from Parliament to oversee a colony made up of Providence and the other communities of Rhode Island. Williams was ready to practice what he preached, establishing a government based on the consent of the people, tolerating all religion, and separation of church and state. We see those same government principles in our Constitution and our rules. His endorsement of religious tolerance made Rhode Island the most liberal settlement of its time. This colony served as a refuge where all could come to worship as their conscience dictated, without interference from the state. Rhode Island provided a tolerant home for Quakers and was also home to the first Jewish community. The Puritan clergy in Massachusetts viewed Rhode Island as the sink of New England, where the Lord's breeze rotted. Okay, let's finish this. Williams was not the only one whose views challenged the authorities of the Bay Colony elders. Anne Hutchinson was one of the most famous dissenters from Massachusetts. She was an articulate, strong-willed woman whose views developed out of the Puritan tradition, but soon clashed with that same tradition and the authorities who preserved Puritanism. Hutchinson challenged the Puritan views on salvation. She believed that all one needed to be admitted into heaven was faith in God's saving grace, and that leading a holy life was not a guarantee of salvation. This simplified view of salvation raised questions about the status of who was elect, which raised awkward questions about the role of the community and its leaders. The Bay Colonies leaders accused Hutchinson of antinomianism, or the idea that if you were saved, you did not need to obey the laws of God or men. To most Christian groups, Puritan and non-Puritan alike, this idea was a rejection of the very institutions that God put in place, and implied the equality uncomfortable idea that people could question civil or religious authority. Hutchinson began hosting meetings in her home to review the weekly sermons and discuss the scriptures. These discussions rapidly turned into forums for Hutchinson to assert her own interpretation of religious matters, specifically the idea that there was no direct relationship between moral conduct and salvation. She firmly asserted that good behavior was not a sign of being saved or one of the elect. Her meetings generated a good deal of interest, and a large number of colonists came to hear her speak each week. Hutchinson's increasing leadership began to worry Governor John Winthrop. He felt she was a threat to the authority of the Puritan leaders. Additionally, a woman leading a religious discussion struck the Puritan leadership as a rejection of what they viewed as the natural order of things. They believed that women should be content to be submissive to their husbands and the community. Hutchinson's subversive gatherings led Winthrop and Puritan leaders to take action against her. She was arrested and brought to trial in 1638 for challenging the clergy and asserting her view of the covenant of grace, or the belief that moral conduct and piety should not be the primary qualification for visible sanctification. So she led meetings to contradict the religious teaching of the era, and they did not like that in this community. So they prosecuted her for teaching these for conveying false teachings. The general court quoted the Bible to make their case against Hutchinson, and she responded that she had come by her beliefs through direct revelation from God. The Puritan ministers felt this was blasphemy and banished her from the Bay Colony. Hutchinson Her children and a few followers left Massachusetts for Roger Williams' more tolerant Rhode Island and settled south of Providence. After her husband's death in 1643, she moved to New York, where she and all but one of her children were killed by Indians. Governor Winthrop and several other leaders in the Massachusetts Bay community saw this as God's final judgment of a sinful and unsaved person. So this was a sign of God. They felt the colony had escaped being contaminated by such an evil influence. An exploding population and increasing levels of Puritan intolerance in Massachusetts led to the founding of several new colonies throughout New England. A group led by Reverend Thomas Hooker founded Hartford along the Connecticut River in 1635. Hooker helped to draft the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut, a type of constitution created for the settlement in 1639. The Fundamental Orders were unique because they did not reference the king or any other government or power outside of Connecticut. They also established democratic control by all citizens and did not limit voting rights to members of the Puritan Church. Connecticut was granted a royal charter in 1662. North of the Massachusetts Bay Colony lay communities that emerged from the fishing and trading activities along the coast and eventually became Maine, New Hampshire, and Nova Scotia. The relationship between these areas and Massachusetts changed periodically during the 17th century. By the middle of the century, Maine and New Hampshire had been absorbed into the Bay Colony. Then in 1679, the king separated New Hampshire from Massachusetts, making New Hampshire a royal colony. Initially, the coastal Indians helped the English develop their economy in the new colonies. Okay. So the Pequot War happened in Massachusetts because of an argument. The remaining Indians forged an alliance in hopes of resisting English encroachment on their land. Metacom, a Wampanoag Indian called King Philip by the English, led the coalition. In 1675, they attacked several English villages. They attacked 100 villages. I keep forgetting where we are. Throughout New England, and within a year they were threatening Boston. In total, King Philip's group attacked 52 Puritan towns and destroyed 12 of them completely. After about a year of fighting, the Indians' resistance went down. Philip's wife and son were sold into slavery, and Philip himself was captured and beheaded. It is estimated that nearly 20,000 people were killed in this bloody war. Those Indians who remained were drastically reduced in numbers. Many either fled to the west or were forced to settle in villages supervised by the English, so they could no longer pose a threat to the colonies. However, King Philip's War did slow the westward movement of English settlers for several decades. For a brief time in the late 1600s, the English government developed the Dominion of New England, which sought to bolster colonial defenses in the event of war and bring the colonies under tighter royal control. King James II was becoming apprehensive about the New England colonies' increasingly independent ways, so the Dominion of New England was also designed to promote closer relations between England and its colonies. The Dominion of New England sought to stop American trade with anyone not ruled by England through navigation laws, therefore bringing England's overseas possessions closer to the motherland. King James II felt that out of all of the colonies, Massachusetts was in particular need of supervision because of its expanding power in the New World. So we see the New England colonies of Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. They were doing successful, and then they were doing successful to start this new country as a beginning to this new country. In the next video, in the next few videos, we are going to talk about the geography and political landscape of the southern and middle colonies. And after that, we are getting right into the events that led to America's first war, the Revolutionary War. Hope to see you then. Love you guys.